Did you grow up in your family as the one who needed to uphold the family image, always be on, always be achieving and probably perfect, and or number 4, have to fix or rescue the situation? If yes, it sounds like the hero role was imposed on you in your family of origin. Now, rigid family roles are seen to be part of dysfunctional family systems, and the rigidity of these roles can be very problematic, both when you're a kid, but then particularly when you grow up and become your own person. The roles have sort of good sides to them, right? Being the hero child has some real positives, but also some real negatives. So I'm going to share some things that can be very helpful for you on your healing journey if you are the hero child. So first, you probably grew up feeling like you really could not rely on others. You may also have a feeling that you can't really trust others, but you certainly can't rely on them. You have to rely on yourself. And again, there's a strength in that, right? Of course, we all want to be self-reliant. We all want to rely on ourselves, feel competent, but there's a big drawback. If you feel that you can't rely on others, then as you grow up and you meet people that you can't rely on, you won't be able to differentiate those I can rely on, those I can't, because you will feel like you can't rely on anyone. So why don't I just keep those people in my life who I can't rely on? And you might hit a point in your life where you realize you have nobody to fall back on. And that's a really kind of lonely place to be. And it can breed resentment, anger, stress, working too hard, all sorts of things. The healing work for this piece, not simple, but it really requires beginning to acknowledge that the way you grew up is not necessarily representative of how you have to live the rest of your life. There are other people who you can rely on, and just even opening up that concept might help you to find people to rely on. And then the other thing I think can be sometimes helpful to think about is that we often have people in our lives that we can rely on for certain things, but not necessarily for everything. So who can you rely on to be there as a listening ear, right? Or who can you rely on to be financially trustworthy? It might be helpful to begin to think about how you can rely on people in sort of smaller ways. So that might be something to practice. All right, number 2, if you grew up as the hero child, you might actually not feel good enough. Now, you might have a real dichotomy in terms of how you feel internally, because you might feel like you're the most competent of your family members and maybe of just about everybody you know. You might feel very self-confident in a number of areas, but way underneath, you might actually not feel good enough because your role in that dysfunctional family was to make it look good. Your role was to keep achieving so your parents could point to you and say, see, we're not the problem here because we have this wonder child. But if your role was to be the wonder child to kind of fix the family, you never fixed the family. So you might actually end up feeling not good enough, even though, let me just say, make it really clear, it would have been impossible to fix the family. But as a child, if you thought that's what you were supposed to do, it didn't work. And then the other piece is if you're always pointed to as the hero child, and I talked about this a little bit in my overview video on dysfunctional family roles, but if the hero child and the scapegoat get in a fight and the parents totally side with the hero child, you might know internally that that wasn't really fair. That's going to lead me to my third point. But before I go there, it can really make you feel like you have a false self that you show the world and you hide who you really are, which later in life limits relationships and again leaves you feeling isolated and lonely very often. So the work here is really to begin to uncover some of those negative core beliefs and heal them and begin to love yourself just for who you are. Really try to move into that space of I'm good enough. I'm a good enough person rather than trying to be the awesome one or the super achiever or the number one in the room. I think that if you begin to start going simply for like, I want to feel like I'm good enough, you'll have a better chance of getting there. All right, number 3, remember when I talked about fighting with the scapegoat sibling and the parents back you and blame the scapegoat? You probably feel guilty. And that feeling of feeling guilty, of feeling like you don't quite deserve the accolades you were given, can be a very pervasive, ongoing feeling. You also maybe grew up that you felt responsible for other people's emotions, actions, right? You were probably like in some way or another the caretaker or the leader of the group. And therefore, you might feel guilty because you're feeling responsible for things that are actually not your responsibility. You might also feel like you don't quite deserve your success, right? You might have sort of imposter syndrome, or you might be successful, know you're successful, and be unhappy. And I do have a video on the correlation or lack thereof between success and happiness that you might find super useful, because it also talks about the burnout that can come from continually needing to achieve what might eventually feel like really empty goals. Number 4 problem is that the hero child often doesn't get therapy until they're an adult. They're not the identified patient. They're not the problem in the family. Oh, you don't have to worry about her or him or them. They're doing just great. We're not taking them to therapy. So you don't get the opportunity to explore why you may not be feeling as good as you think you should feel. You don't get an opportunity to really explore internally, who am I? What do I want? How has this family dynamic impacted me, right? So sometimes the hero child doesn't get into any kind of therapy or real self-help work until way later in life, when they've already moved into that role of enabler and caretaker for everybody, perhaps married somebody who's somewhat dysfunctional, or ends up being the caretaker for their extended family on an ongoing basis. So stopping these behaviors, shifting on a deep level these core beliefs, is not easy work, but it is possible. Working on boundaries, right? But also sort of the negative core beliefs, changing some of those, the self-care you might be missing. And I have a number of programs that address this type of thing, but I would like to suggest that you take the Boundary Personality Quiz. It's quick, less than 5 minutes, kind of fun. It identifies actually the positive core statement underneath you, depending on where your boundary issues are. And that positive core statement actually also highlights the negative core belief that's under that. So I think you get a lot of good information from that quiz, and beginning this journey on a deep level, super important. The quiz will be linked in the description to the video, and I truly wish you health and healing. See you next week.